Hi, in this video we'll be talking about Unit 3, Patterns of Organization, and you'll be able to answer the questions, what are some common patterns of organization, also called rhetorical modes or styles, and how do I identify them? So these are the terms that you should know by the end of this presentation, the term rhetorical modes or style, as well as those various patterns: definition, classification, generalization and example, cause and effect, comparison and or contrast, list, sequence, and summary. So we're just going to go through all of them, starting with the idea of patterns of organization to begin with. Essentially, a pattern of organization is the way that the author has chosen to present the material. Different types of content sort of lend themselves better to different patterns of organization. Sometimes we call patterns of organization rhetorical modes, rhetorical styles, or writing patterns. All of those terms are interchangeable, but they refer to the way that the material is organized on the page. So sometimes if an author is trying to categorize or group items together, they might use what we call a classification style. And in this case, the author is trying to divide a topic into its specific parts based on characteristics. So some signal words that you would want to look for in the writing that might indicate that an author is using the classification pattern would be these terms that are listed here on the screen. I'm not going to read them all. You can read. But definitely, if you're talking about the different types of something, or different categories of, or these categories consist of, those are keywords that would indicate that the author is using the classification pattern. The definition and pattern is used when an author is trying to define a specific concept or term. And there are some signal words here that you would look at as well. Things like refers to or is defined as. Those phrases would indicate to you that the author is using a definition pattern. Generalization and example is a pattern of organization that is used usually when an author is trying to provide a general statement about a topic and then provide examples that support or prove that statement. So some keywords, some signal words to look for in the text would be for example, for instance, to illustrate, or such as. Anything along those lines would help you determine this pattern of organization. Cause and effect is one that generally students are typically pretty familiar with. Cause and effect is essentially just showing how things are related by showing that one thing causes another thing. And there are some signal words that you can look for that would help you determine whether this pattern is being used. The words causes or effects, but also things like results or because or consequently. These are additional indicator words. Comparison and contrast is another pattern that many students are comfortable with. This is essentially an either or both. So you could have a pattern that is all comparison, where an author is taking two different categories and comparing them and showing how they are similar. Or you could have an author who is taking two different ideas or things and contrasting them and showing how they are different. Or the third option is that in the text the author is both comparing and contrasting how two things are both similar and different. So you might see just these words over here on the left, like, similarly, resembles, comparison, or you might see the words in the right-hand column which indicate contrast. Differently, however, despite, rather than. But you may also see some of both. Okay, so your options when you're trying to determine whether or not an author is using this pattern, you could choose that they are doing a comparison pattern, a contrast pattern, or a comparison and contrast pattern. So those are your choices. Sometimes authors use a listing method. A listing method technically just provides a list of information. The internet is really good at providing what we call listicles, which is like an article in list format, right? The 7 things you never knew you were doing wrong, or so on and so forth, or 41 times when the internet got it right. I don't know. So those lists can also be provided in written form within an article. If an author is using the list pattern, then they're going to use words like also, in addition, another, additionally, and you're going to move through multiple points almost in a list format. It doesn't necessarily have to look like a bulleted list with just single words or phrases. It can be written out, and each list item might be an entire paragraph. So you just have to look for some of these indicator words. There's also the sequence pattern. Sequence refers to the order of events, right? So a writer is going to be using this kind of pattern of organization in order to describe a process, a series of events, spatial order, or order of importance. And typically you will find indicator words like first, second, and third, before, after, next, last, finally. And you may also want to look for words like steps, stages, or times. That will help you to understand sequentially how the items are happening in order. So that's what you would look for if you were trying to determine this kind of a pattern in a text. And then finally, you might find that some authors use a summary pattern where they are trying to provide a brief or condensed review of another topic that is generally more detailed or in-depth. And you can look for signal words like in summary, in conclusion, to summarize. Those would all indicate that the author is using this pattern. Now, one thing that it's important to keep in mind is that in a lot of text, a lot of written articles, an author will use multiple patterns of organization throughout the article. So they might start out at the beginning by summarizing the current, the current beliefs about a particular topic. Then they might move into giving you a list of reasons of something, something, something. And then they may provide you with a generalized statement and some examples. And they might finish off with a statement of cause and effect to show how this impacts other things. So patterns of organization or rhetorical modes can change within a text. You won't necessarily be able to identify one pattern of organization for an entire text. You might read an article and be able to pick out 4 or 5 different patterns throughout the article. So just be aware that patterns of organization can be used in multiple ways throughout a text. This is also important for you as a writer. When you are providing the information, just realize that you have all of these different rhetorical modes at your disposal, and you can use them as necessary throughout your writing in order to get your point across in the best, most efficient way. So hopefully this answers your questions about patterns of organization, and I hope that you'll be able to address the questions now that the presentation is finished. But if you can't, certainly let me know if you have additional questions, and I'll do my best to help.